a lot of genealogical information from her. And unfortunately, the Upcraft family Bible burned in a fire in the late 1800s. And so it's not available. So we had to uh, delve into it. My mother and my brother started it, and we had to delve into it to find out, to get information. And so my brother asked my Aunt Nell Benson, what is the relationship between the Sterling and the Scriba Upcrafts? And every time she'd say, oh, they're cousins of Pa. So that's where that expression came from. And then when I met Darlene, then she was telling me that everybody in Scriba thought they were cousins. And so we were searching for the origin, the connection. And of course, it had to be in England because they both came over from England. My children bought me a DNA kit for Christmas. Lisa Murray. She's right there. She's my daughter. And I processed the DNA kit. And of course, I belong to Ancestry. And so all of a sudden, I get a message on Ancestry from a man named Handsome, Gil Handsome. And he said, I'm a DNA match to you. Well, I was sure he was. I mean, the first person I found out was a DNA match was my brother. And so that let my mother and father off the hook, But look, anyway, he said, I know what our connection is. And one of the things that my brother had, as far as who was Henry's father, was that his mother's name was William, his father's name was William and his mother's name was Mary. All we knew was William and Mary. I could have been the ones they named it. Oh, Jeff, awesome. Now I understand. But anyway, and he said, yes, it's William Upcraft and it's Mary Reed, R-E-E-D. And he said, I know because I remember my people talking about it. And I said, well, by any chance, do you have crooked fingers? He goes, yes, I do. Now, I don't know about the Scriba side of the family, but we all have crooked fingers and missing knuckles. And my little pinky here is crooked. This one has one. This one has 1.5. My daughter has them. And they came down through other sides of the Upcraft family. So if any of you have crooked fingers, welcome to the Upcraft. You would be related and not know about it. Okay. So anyway, my mother and my brother started searching, and of course my mother saved everything. I mean, she wasn't a messy person. She just, because she valued that kind of thing. And my father had a lot of pictures, and he really wasn't an awful lot interested in it. But between my mother and my brother, they were able to chase things down. And they taped people, and my brother even went to Texas to tape up Grace Upcraft. It's not the one I miss it. And we've interviewed a number of people, but nobody could make the connection. So once I had William and Mary, then we're all of us, even in Scriba, were saying Henry and James. Henry came here first, and James came here second. They must have been brothers. Makes sense, doesn't it? But there's no James in William and Mary's family. So I'm thinking, well, sometimes things overlap a little bit. You get grandchildren before you have the last child, that kind of thing. So I looked at the first person that William and Mary had, and his name was John. And I looked at his children, and there he was, James, the right birth date and everything. So that just fell into place. So I'm going to begin a little bit. This will be recorded, but I did want to get through a little housekeeping, tell you things. First, I had in here, because this is only down 2 generations. I went down 4. And you got a lot of Scriba. You got a lot of Scriba Upcrafts here. So the Scriba Upcrafts. So over this page and this is all one card. But not that many Scriba Upcrafts left Scriba. So Henry was here for quite a few years before he moved over to Sterling. So I got this for you so that when I go through the genealogy, can you hear? Oh, okay. When you go through the genealogy, you can kind of keep track of where I am. Now there'll be other people in between here, but it'll give you a pretty good idea, because if you don't, it's going to get pretty confusing. Because James had, 8, 9 children, and they had 3 children that had almost 10 or above 10 children, and it just went on and on and on. And I was going to go all the way down to the living people, but that's where I got. And what I found was that despite the fact that all they knew was that they were cousins, the two branches of the family actually interacted with each other a lot. And I also have some interaction between the Upcrafts in America and the Upcrafts in England. And that was another fluke came down through, because Darlene had 2 letters that were written by a John Upcraft. I presume it was the John and his son, and James Upcraft Jr. And they sent letters to each other, and I'll be darned if I didn't find him talking about relatives. Oh, there's that president. There's who he's talking about, So, but nothing in genealogy is cast in concrete, because you just never know. Even when they do census records, the census record people sometimes don't know how to write, or don't have a blended family, and they first, last name comes along, and they just do a down there, and they're not really Upcrafts or something else. So, at any rate, there's, as my mother used to say, many a slip twixt the cup from the lip. And my brother had a friend, for example, he did his father's genealogy. And he always spent so much time on it. He was so proud, and he got it all organized. He was about to read a book, and then his mother told him that wasn't his father. But he's the one that raised him, so he was proud of that, really proud of that. So there are a lot of things. You go through translations, and now that we have things digitized, in other words, computerized them, and now with AI, and that's a rascal. Sometimes it takes you off in the wrong direction you don't want to go, but nonetheless, it can give you clues. And that's what you have to look at. Everything is a clue. It's not necessarily cast in concrete. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have several, I've got a bunch of pamphlets that I've written, just gathering information from different sources and combining it with the information I have. My mother wrote a book. She went to Little Red Schoolhouse in Sterling. She taught there. She taught at both the Junction, and my father taught at West Amboy. And I'm a teacher, and my brother was a teacher, and I just didn't know there was anything else you could do when I was young. But anyway, we lived next door to the Little Red Schoolhouse. Now we had a house in Fairmont too, because my father was principal of Fairmont School. But he either commuted or, we were there all summer because he only worked for 10 years. But we'd be up there on the weekends, and of course he had to mow lawn, and yes, he had to mow lawn, and it was a big lawn, and that's all I did all weekend long. But one thing that I used to do, and I can tell you this story now because I'm sure the statute of limitations is over, but I used to open up the window in Little Red Schoolhouse where my mother taught and crawl in the window, and I had this huge imaginary class of students, and that was my first class I ever taught. And one time, my Aunt Hazel, who started the Sterling Historical Society, or started that, it was the first historian, she lived up the street, and one day I rang the bell. Now, she knew I was in there, but I rang the bell. And so she came running down, and she goes, "Oh, it's you. Don't ring the bell." So anyway, I've spent a lot of time in Sterling, and I went to Oswego. I graduated from Oswego, and you'll catch me saying Oswego and Oswego, or maybe even Swigga, and Creek and Crick. You'll hear it all from me, and I'm very conflicted as far as my language is concerned, because I spent time in suburban Syracuse, and I also spent time here in what my father used to call God's country. I will have pamphlets available for you. I didn't want to print them all off today, but we have started a Upcraft family group on Facebook. If any of you are familiar with Facebook, you can go there and look at any time. You could post things, and my name and my email and my snail mail, my phone number is there. If you see any of these things you want, don't hesitate to give me a call. And I can send them to you either by email, or I can send you paper copies. I'm also going to print out paper copies of my presentation tonight. So, because I have a lot on the slides, I'm not going to read the slides to you because there's an awful lot of information. But I wanted to have a place where you could go for all the details. Okay? Okay. We'll start out with our English roots. And this is a DNA match between me and Gillian Hansen. And between us, we figured out we had matching relatives named William Upcraft and Mary Reed. And they came from Attleboro, mostly Norfolk, little towns like Hillgate. And this is William and Mary had these children. And one of them was Henry Upcraft, and he's the one that came over first. He came over in 1840, and that was my great-great-grandfather. And John Upcraft had a son named James. See that over there? See that? So Henry and James are really uncle and nephew. And this is Norfolk, where they came from, in England. Newmarket, Reesbeck, Hillgate, Dowling Market, Upwell and Outwell, and Allswell, I guess. And when they immigrated, it was very, very difficult because they went on what's called packet ships. They didn't have human transportation over the ocean. They just had goods, barrels of tea and so forth. And so once people started coming over, they realized that they could take on people that were immigrated. So that's what they did. They took these ships and set them up so they could take people. Now this was before Ellis Island. So when they came over, it took weeks. It took weeks to come over, and each of them had a bunk.
I just got a message.
They each had a bunk, like a bunk bed. The whole family had shared this bunk. And
This is so cool.
Henry came over with his wife Sarah and his 4 sons, Robert, John, Charles, and George. The ship was called the Gladiator, and Thomas Gritton was the captain. And this is a summary from, see the box? That's where they sat. This lady wrote a blog about her ancestors coming over on the Gladiator in 1846. And so it's close to that. And also, James Audubon came on the Gladiator, and he brought a whole bunch of birds with him, and he brought some cats with him. And most of the birds died, but the cats, he said, were very well. So, look at that one. And then James came over in 1851. And this is Scriba in 1857. And you can see that Henry lived here, and James lived here, right down the road from each other. It's my understanding that the Upcrafts owned all that land in between. right up near the lake. Now, Henry's home is gone, but he left his chimney for all of us to see. That's where his property was. So we have no idea what it looked like. It could have been a tent, for all we know. And this is James's homestead when he came over. And I believe this little picture down the bottom was the original way it looked. And the Burgett's Directory in 1909 showed a lot of upcrafts in it, so I wanted to show you this. And when you get home, you can look at it because it gives you the directions to their homes. And it says that Mrs. lives there. We don't know her name, she's just Mrs. And it tells some of the people that lived in the house in 1909. And then, this was an Upcraft family reunion at Beach Oswego. Does anybody know where that is? It's over on the other side of the river, and the beach is no longer there because it's been washed away. Supposedly there was a tavern there too. And Harriet Upcraft was the guest of honor, and it was in the newspaper. And she graciously received the homage of her devoted family. About 70 were present, among number being from Rochester, Sterling, and Fulton. The majority of the guests were from Scriba. A bountiful dinner was served in the hotel, the proprietor of which was very kind and courteous. Dancing followed the dinner, and the occasion was a delightful one, in spite of the disagreeable weather. So I've been able to identify a lot of my relatives in here. And I'm going to have the picture available to you up on the Facebook page, because I'm anxious to find out who all these other people are. So if you identify any of these people, that would be just great. But they did get together. So now that we know that James and Henry weren't brothers, they were nephew and uncle, then we also know that James and Captain John and Charles and George, Robert, Merriman, and Will, they were all cousins, which that made sense for them to say cousins of Pop. Captain John was one of Henry's sons. Charles was one of Henry's sons. So was George, Robert, Mary, Jane, and Will. Now, James Upcraft had all these children. Let's see, 9 children together. Okay? And this is where you can start looking at your book so you can see when we are. And again, we'll point to the map. James came to the United States in 1851. He was a blacksmith. Okay? He was known as an expert. He was also a Democrat in politics, extraordinarily found in upper office. He died on April 5th, 1908. And oh my, these are the children of James. And I'm sure you have craftsmanship will notice where you are in this whole tree. There was Joseph, James Jr., Susanna, Elizabeth, Sarah Jane, John, Mary, Jane, and Henry. Now, Joseph was the first child of James Upcraft, and he was born in Outwell, England. He married Kate Torbett, and they had 2 children, Willamar and Bertha Clare. He was a member of the Scribers Center Grade, Ionian Lodge, Athenaeum of the city, and a member of the North Scriba Baptist Church. I'm going to talk a little bit about the churches when we get later on into here, because they were really important to everybody. Between that and the Grange, they wouldn't have survived. So his first child was William, and his second child is Bertha Clara Darrow, and she had 4 children. And then the second child of James Upcraft died within a year of his birth. So we just have a little baby picture. We'll pretend that's him. James Upcraft Jr. Now, this is a lot of information on here. I'm not going to read it all to you because I don't believe in that. But he was in the advertising business, making calendars and novelties. And he was Trinity Methodist Church member and its board of trustees. He was member of Oswego Lodge, number 127, Lake Ontario, chapter 165, Lake Ontario Commentary, in 82, Knights Templar, and it goes on in that, the rustic shrine. He was also a member of the Old Volunteer Firemen. His first son, married Edna Maxey. The second son of James Jr. was Margaret Elizabeth. And the third was Alice Marie. And the fourth child, then comes the fourth child of James Upcraft. We're going back to James Upcraft's children now. She was very active. He was very active in the Methodist Church. Let's see. Susanna was the next child of James, the fourth child. Yeah, she was the one that was very active in the St. Louis Church. And then there was Susanna. She was the first child of she had Jenny Phoebe. And then Jenny Phoebe had 2 children. And then the fifth child of James was Elizabeth Upcraft Holliday. And she married John Holliday from Minetto. And they had a bunch of children. There was Elizabeth Upcraft, or Fred Gridley Holliday, Diana Anna Lillian, Mary Jane. She went to the Panama Canal Zone and worked there as she was in Secretary of Lacassity at the Coleman House. Okay, and Elizabeth Holliday also had Grace Leona, Neil Patrick, Alexander Aaron. See, I have a lot of their children in here too, so you can see. William Horace, and his brother Norton, Genevieve, Leon Carlisle. That's their 10th child, more coming. 6th child of James Upcraft was Sarah Jane. And she married George King. So that's where all the Kings come from. They had 11 children in 18 years. So. Maud May, Frederick George King, William King, James Henry King, Jesse Raymond King, John L. King, Walter Joseph King, and then there's just Kate. That's all I could find on the ancestry. I didn't have any more information except he was born when his father was 46 and mother was 35, and he had 7 brothers and 3 sisters. Mabel Lillian King, Richard King, Hazel Plum King. Okay, now we get to the 7th child of James Upcraft. All right? And the 8th child of James, now he only had, he didn't have any children. He married Augustus Sherman. And Mary Jane, they had 3 children, Susan Lillian, Edward King, and Mary Arlene. And now we get to the 9th child of James Upcraft. Henry Upcraft. He belonged to the North Sterling Scriba Baptist Church. And there's his family. I don't know if you would see that very well. I got that picture from Darlene. And I think they must have used it as a target because it had like a bullet hole. And so I restore photographs anyway. So I went in and I found, I covered up the bullet hole. And that orchard in the back is an orchard that James planted because he worked over in Fulton, and every night he brought home a little tree and planted it. but he didn't do it in rows or anything like that. He just planted it like where it was a good place to go, he thought. And that's the orchard. That I guess he's pretty famous for that. And those are his kids, Willard, Frank, Levere, and I don't know what the dog's name is, but if I get it to you, I'll send you need. Okay, first child of Henry and Upcraft was Susan Emily Upcraft. And she attended Scriba Baptist Church, and she belonged to the Grange, or belonged to the Crochet Club of Scriba. Have you heard of that? I ran into somebody that knew what that was all about. And then there's Minnie Elizabeth. And she married Max Chester Cole, and they had 5 children. And she had several grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. So Florence was the 3rd child of Henry Upcraft, and she died at the age of 19. But she did belong to the Baptist Church. William H. Upcraft was the 4th child of Henry. He died within a year of his birth. So I'm not spending an awful lot of time on the little babies, which you can imagine what a tragedy that was. Francis Henry Frank Upcraft, and they had 4 children. And Willard Reuben was the 6th child of Henry Upcraft, and he married Anna Louisa Parkhurst. They had 3 children during their marriage, Wayne, Byrne, and a daughter, Ann Upcraft. We just met. I knew that she was around, but we decided now that we're going to be friends and twins. Like I told her, like the Dr. Seuss book, thing 1 and thing 2. No. But we haven't decided who's 1 and who's 2 yet. And then there's Cole. And I got, in some of these I don't have all of the children. I think I explained that to you because you don't see them all. If I happen to know them myself, talk to somebody who knows them, that's great. Levere worked for Oswego Soybean, Marathon Paper, Oswego Hastings, Agway, and Thomas Scriba, while working as a part-time farmer. And he's still getting, I ran into him. In fact, I chased him down. I called him because I found his house and found that it was built in 1857 and it never changed hands. And the guy's name is Dean Upcraft, and thing of him. So I called in. You thought I was spam. So he didn't respond to me. But then I came last summer. I came and I stopped in front of the house, and nobody answered, of course. And so this lady comes tooling along, and she said, "Are you looking for something?" And Lisa said, "Yeah, we're looking for the Upcraft homestead." She goes, "Well, I know somebody you might know." And the next thing you know, we're following her down to somebody else that has an Upcraft connection. And come to find out, Dean lived part-time in a trailer right next to it. He said, "He lives right over there." But he's not there now. He's out in his fields, So all of a sudden, this car rolled up. And so this crazy old lady walked out with a, "Are you Dean Upcraft?" And he looked at me. And finally, when I started talking about the family, he realized, what I was all about. And then he got all excited. And we got a lot of information that exchanged as a result. Now, Robert Upcraft, we're going to the other side of the family. This is the 1st child of Henry Upcraft. Robert came over on the boat with Henry and the other boys. But we lost him. We know he died in 1840, was buried in Hannibal. That's all we know about him. But he was born in England in 1829. And then there was Captain John. He was quite a character. He he married Elizabeth Reed, and then he married Anna Briggs, and then he married Mary Jane, or Frances Haddon. And he was a boat captain on the Oswego River and on my canal. Now you notice I'm saying Oswego. Sometimes I'll say Oswego. Sometimes I'll say Swigda like it's supposed to be. That's because I lived in Fairmont. I spent my summers in Sterling, and I went to college at Oswego, and you had to call it Oswego, and they call you Italian. And I kept saying, "What's wrong with being Italian?" You know. So anyway, he purchased a Lakeview farm. This is Lakeview Farm. Now, there's a story connected with this. My husband, John Forwin, he went to Oswego too, and we met at Butlin's. And that's a secret book. And we were going, somebody wrote a genealogy about the Corwine family years ago. It was published in 1878. So we're looking through this book. And we find this Gershom Corwine. He got a Revolutionary War grant for Lot 5 in North Sterling, southwest Oswego. And so I got, my aunt is Hazel Freilich, I don't know, and she used to come to all the unions over here a long time ago. But she said, well, let's go see if it's the same thing. So we went down to the Sterling Cheese Factory before they cleaned it up and went through all these dusty old books and finally found land records. And I'll be darned if this house wasn't the house that Captain John Upcraft bought and furnished into a fine country home as the Oswego Euclid County history like says. But anyway, would you believe that? I mean, they were from Salem, Massachusetts, and his original ancestor was the judge at the Salem witch trials. So anyway, and Captain John was the first master of the Oswego Grange. It was so important. The Grange was so important because that was your connection to surviving. That and between that and the church, you know, you couldn't email a friend across the country or whatever. You just had to get to know people and live around them for that. But anyway, they put this Pomona Grange together, and I used to go to Grange meetings. I thought it was cool. In fact, my kids joined the junior Grange, and they made my son the gatekeeper. And they kept saying, gatekeeper, gatekeeper. And somebody said, he is asleep. Wasn't very good gatekeeper. Anyway, he eventually had a son, Edlin, by Anna Briggs. And Grace Upcraft was the first child of Edwin. She married David Simmons, and they had one son. And then she also had Ruth Ann Simmons and Roy Simmons. The second child of Edmund Upcraft was Roy Simmons, The third child of Edmund Upcraft was Harry. The fourth child of Edwin Upcraft was Bessie. Raymond Upcraft was the fifth child of Edwin Upcraft. And then we come to Charles. Charles fought in the Civil War for a few months. And apparently he had a little indigestion, couldn't handle the war. So he had his brother. My brother has a letter that our great-grandfather George wrote to them about how sick he was, and so he got discharged. But he had Anna Estelle, and then she had Mabel Gladys Piggott, and there's another child of Anna Estelle. Margaret was the second child of Charles Upcraft. She died as a teenager. Then there's William Hanley. He was the third child of Charles Upcraft. And he had 4 children. And I don't know if any of you knew Merwin Upcraft. He was the sheriff in Hannibal. Did he pull over any of you older folks here? Well, he pulled over my father one time, and my father was mad. He was really mad. He's my cousin. But he pulled him over. So, and the first child of William Henry was Ada Louise, Kenneth William. Now, you probably remember Kenneth. You might. His son was a shop teacher, and he worked for my father at West Tennessee. My father was principal at West Tennessee Junior High School. And then Merwin, Dorothy Mary, John C., and then there was Charles Upcraft Jr., and he married Frances Upcraft. Charles and Frankie owned a home over near Martville, between Martville and Crockett's, and Barbara Longley owned that home for years. This is Barbara Longley, by the way. She was married to Harold Longley, one of the Longley brothers, and she's been really helpful to me. We are one of only 4 living cousins of our great-grandfather George. So that's Charles Upcraft Jr. John Upcraft was born in 1901 and died the same day. Grace was the second child of Charles Upcraft Jr. She married Horace Smith. Mildred Bell, she had 6 children in 13 years. And then there's another Mildred, and I have no idea where she came from. Usually the one that doesn't have any information is before the one you know a lot about, because they name one Mildred, and then that child passes away or doesn't get sick or whatever, and then they name another 1-year-old. So I'm not too sure about this. Again, it's one of those slips between the cup and lip. And then Frances Ruth Upcraft. Fred George was the 7th child with Charles Upcraft, and he had Frances R., Howard J., and now we get to the George Upcraft family. Now, this part of the slideshow is a little fancier because I had this made for another show that we had at Cousins in Sterling that got together 4 of us, and we were the last 4 living cousins. And this is where George Upcraft lives. And when I got this photograph, it was just one big gray mess. And I could see the horse and George and Tilly. That's Tilly Upcraft. And then the other 2 on the right-hand side, but that little thing in the middle looked like the bushes, me, when it was there. But when I brought the picture to life, so to speak, I realized it was my grandpa. So that was kind of special. And that's awesome. It was in North Sterling. And P. and John Hickey built a muck down there, and they were muck farmers. And I have the book on muck farming here. And so I bought 3 of them. I had a big one for my brother. But Barbara worked on the muck, didn't you? She worked on the muck. In fact, she had a rather unfortunate experience. When they made the muck, they burned the roots. And so she was walking down the road, and she saw this really nice little sand pile. She thought she was going to play in. And the minute she stepped her foot in there, it was hot. They were still ashes and embers. So they finally called to a doctor and got her all fixed up. But she chopped the onions and hired things around, and also milked the cows on this farm. And she learned to ride horses and never stopped. This is George Upcraft Sr. See how fancy this is? Now, this is kind of a funny genealogy story. He was born on October 15th, 1839. My brother was born 100 years later to the date. And my brother was all excited, and he went to Aunt Nell, and he said, I was born 100 years later to the exact date. And Aunt Nell said, well, and he said, well, it's on his gravestone. She said, I wouldn't be so sure about that. When he died, we knew he died in the middle of October, but we didn't know what date, so we told him it was the 15th. So that's what's on his gravestone. So who knows what. So you just have to be really, really careful when you run into this stuff. He came with Henry, of course, and his sibling Robert, John, and Charles. He lived in Scriba with his mother and father, next to that big chimney. And his mother died in 1846. Henry married Margaret Torwit. Now, there's an interesting little story here. I'm not sure, but Margaret Torwit, on one census record, is there, and she has a daughter named Margaret, and she has a daughter named Catherine, or Kate. Now, both of those are listed on Joseph Upcraft's grave as wives of his. And the dates are very similar. We can only vote by the census records and a few other really secure things, but he may have married both of them, for all we know. But it's just an interesting little twist. This shows a census record, Henry, Sarah, Robert, so forth. You've seen that before. And he and his brother Charles fought in the Civil War. They were in the same regiment and company. He married Harriet Matilda Horowitz Upcraft. And here's where they lived in North Sterling. He had 7 children. Martha Ann, which was Matt. Doris, okay. George Upcraft Jr. and Ella. And they had a girl named Doris. And she had all these boys. They're all the Pritchard boys. And some girls. Clarence, he was born in Sterling. He attended Sterling Baptist Church. He married Emma Grace Walrath. They had 1 child, Mia. Then married Eva Louise Taylor. Yeah, sweet girl. And Lee and Clarence were born in 1905. Okay, and Nellie Upcraft, she lived to be a ripe old age. She's the one that reminded my brother that he was 100 years older than her father. And she had Hilda. She married Edward Vincent. I don't know where that's related to you guys or not. They attended Sterling Baptist Church. They worked on a farm in North Sterling. And Hilda went on to have several girls. And this is my grandfather, John Henry. He married Edna Fry. He was active in everything, the Grange and church activities and all of that. He had 2 children, Hazel Marie Upcraft and Milton John Upcraft. And Milton is my father. And Hazel has a long list of things. Her husband died when she was in her 30s, wasn't her? Largest daughter.
He was 45. He was 45. She was 3 boys and
Oh, okay. But she raised 2 boys with 2 kids on her own, Barbara and Roy. And she was a historian and very active in establishing the museum or at schoolhouse. And she was active in churches, and she graduated from normal school, and she was active in an awful lot of things. I really admired her. She was kind of a mentor to me. My father taught all over the place. He taught at West Amboy, Roosevelt Fairmont School, and my mother taught for him sometimes. He'd evaluate her as a teacher, and she'd come in, she'd sit down, and he goes, well, where are we having for supper? Lives. I had my mother for a teacher and my father for a principal. Can you imagine that? And I had to go home to that. And then Daisy Dawn, J.C. married John Hickey, and they didn't have any children. But they lived right up on the corner, right at the top of the hill, more Sterling, that house. And then Mary Jane was the fifth child of Henry Upcraft, and she was born here, but she died when she was 19. And then Will was born in 1843 and died the same day. So, here's a photo of all the pictures, and there's lots more over here. So you want to be sure and look at them, and if you're welcome to take pictures. If any of you want, we said to take a picture of a 5 generations family or whatever, we'd be glad to do that. This is St. Cummins Church in Upwell, and that's the first church that we know of that the Upcrafts went to. And then there was Sterling Baptist Church, and my great-grandfather, and his wife were very active in this church. And I remember going to church there. They tore it down, and when they tore it down, they sold the windows, or they gave everybody notification the windows are built. So my father went up and bought the Upcraft window. So that's the Upcraft family window. My brother had it. He built a whole family room around it, and I had these chairs, and there's another. This is the interior of the church, and my brother had the one in the middle, and he donated that to the Middle Red Schoolhouse that's there. And there is also a quilt there, and Tilly organized this. She got together with everybody in the church, and they signed a quilt, and then they embroidered their names. And church was very active in the Underground Railroad, and they wrote a resolution about slavery and said that they weren't welcome in church if anybody believed him and treated him that way. Both Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony preached at the church. My mother went to the Sterling Methodist Church, which was right across the street from us. And one day they were getting a new organ, and they wanted to sell the organ, so my mother bought it for $25, carted it across the street. My brother took it down to State College, where he lives, and then he decided to give it to the museum. So he hauled all the way up to the Red Schoolhouse. They could have just brought it across the driveway, And there were several churches in Scriba. There was First Free Baptist Church at North Scriba, and the churches would always merge with each other, and when things got sparse. There's Christ the Good Shepherd Church, and that's a conglomeration of a bunch of Catholic churches. And here we are. This is Lycoming Methodist Church. I was there Saturday, and I'm told that this is the original building, but the next generation of church built those horse sheds along the side, so they could shed the horses were in there. Okay, here's a bunch of Upcrafts getting together, and 4 generations from George Upcraft. We took a 4-generation picture. George Sr., George Jr., and Doris, and I'm not sure who the baby is. But here's 5 generations for Aunt. This is Aunt Nell over on the left, and her daughter her daughter Hilda. Barbara's on her lap, and that's Tilly. Tilly looked to be a right old age. My brother actually remembers her. And of course, I got this picture again. This is another one. And this is cool families and clothes, and I'm sure you recognize people in here. When you get these slides, you're going to be able to see all for yourself. And here's some more pictures. Now, this one is interesting because it shows Francis Hattie, Margaret Upcraft, Harriet Upcraft, Captain John, and Joe Upcraft. And apparently that's his wife background, which means that probably didn't marry Margaret Troy. Francis Upcraft and Harriet Upcraft. Harriet is Tilly. And then we have, these are all just within this George Upcraft family. And then we have Nellie Vincent and Hilda and Ed in front of their home. And then this has a lot of Scriba Upcraft, so I'm sure you recognize some of them. This is Christmas at Susie's house. Now, this was a reunion at our farm next to the schoolhouse, and that was pretty much just our great aunts and uncles. And I was told that this was a family reunion in New Haven, an Upcraft family reunion in New Haven. But I haven't been able to confirm it, but sure looks like there's a lot of people, you know. And this is now John and Daisy Upcraft, and that's my brother Lee and me and Zippy, of course. I know the name of that dog. And here's a picture of some Grange stuff that was in the newspaper. And on the right is Mrs. Harriet Upcraft, that's Tilly. They're the 3 veterans members of Hope Grange. And then you have communications. And I have a letter, which I will produce for you if you want it, between James Upcraft Jr. and John Upcraft. And he was talking about, I was surprised, like, let's see, I've thought many a time when your father never answered my letter, but as things have been delayed, I hope you'll write me in return. And nothing gives me greater pleasure and stuff. And dear cousin and uncle, you said that you had done well out there, and you think we might if we had come over. So you begin to see some connections between it. And this is a part of the letter. And then this is a postcard that was written to Hazel Freilich, Barb's mother. And it was postmarked in 1911, and Barb got it about 10 years ago. Hazel had died. So, you know, the communications were a little gruff. They found it in the Sterling post office behind a desk or something. But the transportation you had, first you had horseback. That's how you got around. Then you had a horse and buggy. And this was an automobile. We had a boy that used to stay at my grandparents' farm in the summer. He came from the orphanage. And he was standing on a car, and we heard that his nephew owned a restaurant in Fairdale. And so we took this picture to him, and he talked with somebody that was in the restaurant at the time, and he said, "Oh my gosh, that car's worth $1 million today." It's a Case, the Case Russian Machine Company. You probably remember them. From 1910 to 1927, they made automobiles, and they're very, very rare. So there's only 100 of them now. What the fair at now? And we had Mabel Simmons on her sleigh, and Doris Pritchard on her car. The women got around too. And kids had wheels too. This picture in the upper right-hand corner is my father on a wagon hooked up to a dog. And this girl's hooked up to a pony. And here's Margaret and her brother on bicycle. And then I bought it, gave my brother a 1929 Model A40. We drove around the farm all the time. And that was fun. And then there was the perils of horseless carriage. And this, you recognize these people? Okay. And on the left, there's my mother and father in their Commodore Whippet. And this is, and we'll talk about the military now. This is Willie Upcraft. I think Ann had given a talk on him. So we wanted to put him in here. And I also have the New York 184th Infantry Regiment and Company C, where Charles and George fought in the Civil War. And so this tells all the different battles they fought, for those of you who are interested in that. And then George Upcraft, while he was in the war, he carried this card. And my Aunt Daisy wrote on here, she says, my father took it with him to the Civil War. Okay. So, and there's Charles Upcraft in his Company C uniform. And then there were all kinds of occupations. And the letter that went between Vi in England and James Upcraft Jr. Talks about the masters will not let you have much in this country. I've been in one shop for 26 years. And then a few years later, he wrote, things have improved very much since you were here. The masters have to beg of men to work for them. So things changed. And there's my grandfather plowing in his field. And this is, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's the muck that he had. And they are working on it. There's their father with a couple of cows, and my grandmother on a skid. And this is James's orchard. You've seen that before. And here's the hops. So my understanding, there were a lot of hops that were grown in Scriba. And then strawberries. If you're open strawberries, nice thing. Yeah. That woman on the lip looked like she's having a really good time with the strawberry. And there's my father on his tractor. That was the house we lived in next to. You see the Methodist church behind there. And then there was stashing. And this is Daisy and Nell Hickey. And I don't know, somehow I get the feeling there's a mouse that's going to fall from there. But this is the hats that they wore. I thought they were pretty awesome. And then the first schoolhouse, I talk about the first schoolhouse, and there's a history of it there for you to read. And this District 17, here's a picture of the schoolhouse. And there's some kids from the schoolhouse, District 14. And then Scriba Schoolhouse on Hall Road, those are all the teachers. And then my mother, of course, went to Little Red. This is the Little Red Schoolhouse, and here she is in pictures when she was little going to school there. And here's your report card and one of the spelling bee and all that. Then she got invited there to teach. And Preston Clark, I don't know if you know him or not, but my mother said he was a lawyer, a self-educated lawyer, that always had a wad of tobacco in his mouth. So that was his claim to fame. And more of my mother's classes there with the Sterling Center School. I remember going on that swing set. I know somebody that almost went over it, too. This is my mother at District 17, up by the junction where all those railroad tracks come together. And she'd take them out on Arbor Day to plant a tree, and then they'd have a hot dog roast. These pictures from that. And then you are Sterling School. And this is my grandmother, Edna Fry Upcraft. And this is my father's slate, and I have his pencil box here. And Doris Pritchard Slash at North Sterling School. And then Hazel Fralick. This is Barbara's mother. And this is Hazel Fralick's class, and there's my father. And oh boy, I don't know which is worse, having your sister for a teacher or having your brother in your class. But it was interesting. And there was the program that she had for the school. And that's it. We're going to have a question and answer. I'm not sure I can give you a lot of answers, but I think it'd be somebody else in the room that might be able to do that. I have to admit I'm more familiar with the Upcrafts on the Sterling side, but hey, I'm as interested in these stories. This is being recorded, by the way. Did she tell you that? Oh. Well, if you did something in the last hour, you're in big trouble. Okay, so anybody have any questions or comments or stories to tell?
Over here.
Okay.
What did you say was the name of the Facebook page?
It's on your program. Okay. It's right down at the bottom. Yep. It's a group. So you have to go in your groups and then it'll pull up. Yep. Any other questions? Comments? Corrections? Yeah, this. My parents used to go to a reunion of a family that I'm not going to mention the name, but they would come in and they'd all so glad to see each other, and then they'd start arguing, usually about who was so-and-so's son, and by the time they left, they would never see each other. Went back next year.
kind of tractor was it?
It was a farm. Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments? Now you're welcome to come up and take pictures of the pictures that are here. If you want Lisa to take pictures of you here, that's fine too. And again, I have my email and my mailing address and my phone is there. Now I'll tell you what I have for. I have what I can send you is a packet ship Gladiator. There's a lot more really interesting information on that. My mother wrote a book, and I had her book here, and she wrote it, and I illustrated it. And then I have a 184th Infantry Regiment here. I also, for the Northeast Genealogical, Washington State Genealogical Society, I wrote a story, a prize for it, about uncrafted maple Hendricks in 1935. In other words, during the Depression, when times were rough. And then I have the Underground Railroad featuring the Sterling Baptist Church, and then I have the history of the Sterling Baptist Church too. So any of these things you see, you want, pictures you want, whatever, we can arrange to get them to you. Any more questions? Did you learn anything? You know you're taking a test before you get out of this building. Can you tell I was a teacher? So I had an instructor at college that he would say something and he'd go like this. And that Bennett was on the test.
Anybody other than me and Crabber are in animal that has your crab?
How many up has the upper flash ring here?
I know that bro. You're right. How to gamble? I hear about.
No, well, there's the Pritchards. Yes, though.
Right.
They're gone.
Yeah, a couple of Pritchard, the last Pritchard, looks in Salt Bus Dog. I bird. Brother, John Dicey, Saints. Yes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if I hadn't gotten married, I'd still be an Upcraft. I mean, you got to remember there are women in there who had a name named Upcraft, right, Ian? A lot of women had a name Upcraft, like you would think. Oh, yeah. Well, the thing is, it's not that they separate. I don't think there was a big fight or anything like that. But I think that gradually, the bigger the family got, things spread out. I mean, I moved to Washington State, a few other places. And there was a big, commit. So, any more questions? Please take a look at the stuff that's up here. It's really very interesting. I have a crate slat from John Henry Upcraft's farm. And there's some little shoots there, all kinds of neat little things. So take pictures. By all means, if you are interested in those pictures, go for it. Okay? Everybody happy?
Nee, jij. Je hebt basically.